where did the distortion come from?
Yeah.
Because money came before we had central planners and interest rates set by central planners, before we had central banks. And how did things operate before then? I don't know if you've done that as part of your research, and I apologize if you haven't.
Yeah, so I'm going to have some limited. I'm not, a historian here, but and there's a lot of competing views There's a lot of competing views. This is a contentious topic of how money evolved.
Taxation or central banks?
Taxation, for sure, 100%, easily.
Without taxation, you wouldn't have had a central bank.
Of course, and governments have been doing taxes since Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, you can find interest rates, you can find loans, you can find landlords, you can find all these things. But so prior to the ability of the distortion, you asked where did the distortion comes from? Kind of going back to my first principle that money reflects the real, prices reflect the real, interest rates naturally occurring reflect the real. The distortion occurs when some central authority that has the ability to manipulate the supply of money or the time value of money, which is interest, manipulate it. They come in and distort it. And I want to be clear here because we'll probably talk about low interest rates, money printing. But this could also happen by artificially making interest rates more expensive, raising them, or even destroying money. Either one is an alteration. Either one is a distortion. We just don't normally see the other one because it makes life harder for governments.
So pricing is a messaging tool. Pricing is used to it's like a messaging system to allow people to understand the cost of something, that allows them to plan what they require for their business, what they want to accumulate. How does that work then or what is the pitch therefore for a free market? Why is the market so efficient?
So that's kind of this incredible thing. It's kind of this, people will call it kind of an emergent property, which I joke basically is like hand waving for we have no idea of how this thing emerges. It just there's all this complexity and this very ordered structure comes out of it. So you basically it is this interesting synchronization between the universal and the local. So all of us are local actors. I know what I know. I interact with you. I interact with Danny. We participate in whatever structures we're in. And we have knowledge about those structures. And because we have certain knowledge, it allows us to make decisions. It allows us to evaluate price and know how much we're getting paid and know how much things cost. And all of that kind of synchronizes together on a more universal level to produce this highly structured order that is the economic system. And that's what makes it so good. And it emerges organically from the knowledge of countless individual actors making decisions in their domains of expertise. Which is their real lives. And so that it's this signal, it's this, coherency of information that emerges from millions of individual interactions. But so when you have a central authority, when you have a central bank, when you have a government that decides they're going to interfere with the very kind of the measuring stick, the unit, right? It's like if everyone uses a 12-inch ruler to build a house. And then one day, the government wakes up and they change out all the rulers for an 11-inch ruler, but they don't tell anybody. And so they still think they're using a 12-inch ruler. That distorts everything in the system because you're using that as a measure. And the same thing happens with money, right? If we're using money to price things, we're using interest to price things, and that gets distorted, nobody knows really. It distorts all of those calculations and that cascades through the system.
So do you believe the role of the central bank is with good intention that becomes malicious, or do you think it is a central planning system that can only fail because everything it's trying to do cannot work?
I would, if you look at the history of central planners, they all kind of had good intentions, right? They had utopian intentions. You look at the modern era, right? And the Soviets, they were trying to build a utopia, right? They were, in seeing like a state, James Scott, I mean, he does a great job with this, where he looks at the history of central planning failures, and they're always trying to do something really good, but it fails because it's the same principle as with money, right? Where you have a central authority trying to exert control over an organic system that produces a higher quality of information than that central authority can ever have. And that's the breakdown. The central authority can never have as much information as the naturally occurring market. And this is why interventions in money produce such chaos. They produce such disorder.
Because what appears like one small decision can have a cascading effect through everything.
Yeah, it's the second order impacts, it's the cost benefit analysis, it's everything that emerges from it, right?
And it's an unfairer system. A fairer system is one that is bottom up.
Fundamentally. I mean, fundamentally, letting money operate naturally is a fairer system. It is an organic system. Just don't distort it. Don't change it. You know, the governments can go keep themselves busy with something else.
Okay, so in a fair, freer market, how would interest rates, what is the role of interest rates and how should they work?
Yeah, so they should be, so interest rates will emerge naturally, right? We looked at the Ledin dashboard, right? Like nobody told those guys, hey, here's what you should lend at, right? There is an interaction between the supply of capital, of money, and so in a market, there's the availability of capital and physical resources. There's the availability of talent, entrepreneurship, like projects to lend to, the quality of those projects, and the demand for those loans. And all of those kind of come together and synthesize a bunch of information and produce the interest rate. And you know, if capital became incredibly abundant, that interest rate would come down. If capital got incredibly scarce, that interest rate would go up, all else equal. And so you have this problem. I think it might be helpful. So one of the things we see with artificially low interest rates, so we have actually like a lot of history of this. If you look at the 1700s in England, if you look at the 1800s, you can find all of these examples. This is not the first time in history we've tried artificially low interest rates. People have had the brilliant idea multiple times that we're going to kind of monetize our way to abundance, that if we can just manipulate the money in the right way, if we just make more money, make money abundant, then we'll have growth. And it goes pretty much the same way every time. It produces speculation, it produces asset inflation, it produces capital misallocation. And, you know, eventually that kind of collapses in on itself. It causes a crisis.
And it widens the wealth gap because the access to capital is
well, the asset inflation. Yeah. So two things: asset inflation. Whoever already owns the asset, those go up.
Yep.
And access to capital. Right. So I have some quotes in the article about. I think it's a Bastiat quote, and he's saying that under your system, which was low interest rates, he's debating this guy Proudhon, and the wealthy will borrow for free, and the poor will not be able to borrow at all. And so, you know, you think in like a low interest rate regime, if you're Apple, you can probably get pretty close to that 0% interest rate when that was available, right?
Well, isn't that pretty much what Saylor has done with his?
Yeah, because of his size and scale, he can borrow capital at rates that if you or I went to a commercial bank, we would not get those rates, right?
So is he distorting, warping the price of Bitcoin?
Next question.
No, I think it's a fair question, and I think I'd happily ask it to Saylor.
I mean,
but
no, he's not.
Well, no, but if it's not even a pointing a finger at him. There's nothing he's done wrong here. What I'm saying is that if you warp the money, you warp everything else.
I mean, Saylor is increasing the price of Bitcoin, right? The question is that a distortion, right?
Yeah, but if he wasn't able to access the capital at the low rate he had have accessed it at, would he have borrowed so much money, and therefore would he have bought so much Bitcoin, and therefore
probably not.
Yeah,
I mean that's clear, right?
And there's lots of us doing the same. This isn't me finger pointing at him. I've taken out the largest mortgage I can get for my property over the longest term with the lowest deposit, so I can hold more Bitcoin because I know over time my Bitcoin will outperform that. I've done the same just with what I can do.
Yeah,
you know, I took out a loan to buy Bitcoin. I've done all the things he's done, just at the microscopic level.
Yeah. Which is a rational decision given the interest rates and given the comparison between these two assets, right? It's Pierre Richard's speculative attack.
But at the same time, if we didn't have this misallocation of capital, we probably wouldn't have Bitcoin anyway. So Bitcoin is a response to the misallocation of capital.
Yeah, those things are in communication. Those things are in communication with each other.